surprise.
Oh my God, this is amazing.
I'm in shock. That is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
For your chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about.
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Well, we're now going to Gloria De Piero and Christopher Hope. Of course, it's Prime Minister's questions. They're back. The Prime Minister with Kemi Badenoch.
Yay!
It's lovely to see you two, as ever. We want to hear what our viewers and listeners would be asking the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition today.
That's right. Please do send in your questions. Tell us who you are and, most importantly, where you're from. We'll put your questions to our panel here at GB News in our Westminster studio. gbnews.com/your say is how you get in touch. PMQs Live is all about you. But right now, it's about Bev and Andrew. Briefly, what would you both ask the PM?
I'm going to ask the Prime Minister, I would ask him, who's right? The Chancellor of the Exchequer, who told the CBI there'd be no more tax rises on businesses, or the Business Secretary, who yesterday said he can't make that commitment?
And I would probably say, given that it's quite obvious the public are not going with you on this net zero journey, isn't it time to rethink the whole plan?
Two great questions. Of course, net zero was a Tory plan. Let's not forget that. Listen, thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Bev. It's fast approaching midday.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel. PMQs Live starts right now. It is 11:57 on Wednesday, the 27th of November. This is PMQs Live on GB News with Gloria De Piero and Christopher Hope.
That's right. Just one moment. Sir Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch go head-to-head at their weekly joust. PMQs in the Commons chamber. We'll have full coverage of every spit and cough every moment and getting full reaction from Labour MP for Chipping Barnet, Dan Tomlinson, and Shadow Farming Minister Robbie Moore.
And we have a couple of minutes before we take you live to all the action. So I'm going to have a couple of minutes with you discussing the big issue of the week, assisted dying. You guys will have to make a decision come Friday. Have you decided, the Conservatives, Robbie Moore?
So only just have I decided, and the reason for that is I really wanted to understand what constituents were telling me, and I also wanted to engage quite widely with those in the NHS and those that had got strong views on both sides of the argument. And with the bill only being published 10 days or so ago, I wanted to really look at the detail. So I have just now, and I will be voting against the bill that's coming for us on Friday, just because of the concerns regarding the implications on NHS, and also I feel that we should be focusing much more on palliative care.
Yeah, well, big news there from Robbie Moore. Dan Tomlinson, you'll be voting essentially blind, a private member's bill, no idea of the impact of this bill. You're voting on Friday. How will you vote either way on this bill?
Well, we have had a long time to consider this bill. A similar bill was before Parliament back in 2015. These issues have been around and been debated for a long time. You might think that mean that I've already come to a decision, and I actually haven't yet. I'm still wrestling with this one. Personally, I feel very conflicted. That's why I made effort in the last few weeks. I've held an event with people who want me to vote for change, and a different event with people who don't want me to vote for change. I also got together doctors and people who work in end-of-life care to hear their perspectives. Got some time this afternoon to think it through, and I hope to vote one way or the other on Friday, but I still don't yet know which.
Well, Dan, there's no rush, of course, but Gloria, you, of course, are an MP and you voted. How did you vote back in 2015?
I abstained. I was very much in agreement with Dan, who I found it interesting that you said you're not going to abstain like I did. I think I was 52% in favour and 48% against. Now, I think I'm 52% against and 48% in favour. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of abstentions. Do you agree, Labour's Dan Tomlinson?
It does look like there will be some people who will abstain because it is a really difficult decision, and it's also a moral decision as much as it is a practical one as well. And I think if you're like me and you don't have really significant practical concerns with the legislation, then it comes down to judgment. And I think that is a really difficult judgment to make, trying to balance
And I do think because
things.
it is so difficult a decision to make, I really do think there should be actually more debating time in its second reading for this to have been allowed to happen. You know, even the mechanism through a private member's bill on Friday, debating time's actually quite limited. No speech time can be allocated, so everyone can speak as long as they wish on Friday, which will restrict the numbers of those that can contribute.
I would actually just defend the private member's bill as a route for this to go through. I know there's different views on this, but I think actually it is for the good that this has come as an independent private member's bill that isn't whipped, rather than the government bringing forward a bill and Labour MPs feeling like they should vote one way, Conservatives maybe feeling like they should vote the opposite. I think on these issues, it's actually right and proper that it comes through.
Dan, you're a new Labour MP. Why on earth are we having this conversation now, so early in this government? You're trying to find your feet after a difficult summer. Why on earth are we having this big moral discussion about assisted dying?
It's quite practical, really. Kim won the ballot in the private member's bill ballot, where the balls get drawn out of the big fish bowl, and she came top. And this is an issue that's important to her, and she wanted to bring it forward. Again, I don't think it would have been proper for the whips to lean on her and ask her to bring forward a different topic. And as we've discussed, you know, Gloria, you voted on this in 2015.
Didn't.
This is an issue that has been debated for a long time, that has been in the public consciousness, and I don't feel like we're rushing to a decision.
By the way, we're just watching the end of what I believe is Northern Ireland questions, and we will take you straight to the chamber as soon as the Prime Minister gets to his feet. Robbie Moore, what do you think your leader, Kemi Badenoch, should go on today?
Well, I mean, crikey, there's so much to go on, but I certainly would go on the continued catastrophic concern and worry that the budget is having on many small to medium-sized businesses, our farming community, those running GP practices, not least focusing on the implications of the employers' national insurance raising. There is deep concern out there amongst the business community, and I think that absolutely needs to be addressed.
She was asked directly if she reversed that at the CBI conference on Monday and wouldn't say so. I mean, she's basically saying nothing. It's a lot of principles. At some point, impatience will run out and people want to hear policies from this leader.
Well, you know, the reality of it is we have a Labour government for the next 4, maybe 5 years. Who knows what the state of the finances will be in that period of time? And I think it is too early for Kemi, as our leader, to be making policy decisions specifically around a budget that would take place in 4 to 5 years' time.
Labour's Dan Tomlinson, are your small businesses in your constituency, small and large actually, are they having a go at you?
Well, this is quite interesting. I actually think the Tories are quite enjoying being in opposition and the ability to not wrestle with the hard decisions, not try and think through, OK, what are we going to do in this country to fix problems like the NHS, like our public services? We made a difficult decision to raise taxes, but we did it so that we can put the country on an even keel, our public services and our economy, and I think that was the right decision in the budget and that will be vindicated in the years ahead.
I do wonder whether Luton and the closure of that van factory might come up, and that's a big issue, of course.
Let's
go straight now to the House, so we have Keir Starmer.
I know the sympathies of everyone in this House will be with those affected by the devastating flooding that we've seen recently. And our thanks goes to all those working tirelessly to support the affected communities. Mr. Speaker, we've committed £2.4 billion over the next 2 years to build, maintain and repair vital defences to protect more communities from the awful impact of the flooding. Mr. Speaker, the ceasefire announced in Lebanon is long overdue, but demonstrates that diplomacy can succeed even in the most challenging of circumstances. We must seize this opportunity to build trust, de-escalate tensions and push for a wider ceasefire. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I associate myself with those remarks of those of the Prime Minister? West Hertfordshire Hospital Trust has eliminated 65-week waits and they have now met all 3 national cancer standards. These remarkable achievements by the staff are happening despite the fact that they are working in terrible buildings that are life expired and crumbling. If the government is looking for a project that is high-performing and shovel-ready, this is it. So will the Prime Minister give our trust the green light to build a new hospital without any further delay?
I thank her for raising the issue and obviously of importance to her constituents and beyond. Look, the new hospital programme that we inherited was a failure of the previous government. We are committed to delivering. We're reviewing to make sure we can deliver. The Health Secretary set out further details, but I'm very happy for her to have a meeting with the relevant minister if she wants to follow up on the specifics. Thank you.
Chris Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Residents in Red House Park in my constituency are suffering from soaring management fees and poor service from their fleaseholder management company. Recent BBC reporting has once again demonstrated the consequences of the outdated and feudal leasehold system. All of them are frustrated by the broken promises of the previous government, so will the Prime Minister reassure them that this government will introduce legislation as soon as possible to resolve the fleaseholder and leaseholder crisis?
Mr. Speaker, yes, we will do so. I agree that the last government totally failed to tackle the unfairness of the leasehold system. We will provide homeowners with more powers, protection and greater rights by bringing that legislation forward. Thank you.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Bednall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the CBI conference on Monday, the Chancellor said, and I quote, "I'm clear, I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes." I know that telling the truth to this House is important to the Prime Minister, so will he repeat his Chancellor's pledge now?
Mr. Speaker, we set out our position at the budget that was just set out. We're fixing the foundations. We're dealing with the £22 billion black hole that they left. I'm not going to write the next 5 years of budgets here at this dispatch box. But, Mr. Speaker, we said we wouldn't hit the pay slips of working people. We passed the budget, we invest in the future, and we kept that promise.
Mr. Speaker, he's not fixing any foundations, he's making everything worse. The whole House would have heard him refuse to repeat the Chancellor's pledge, a pledge as worthless as the manifesto promises that he's talking about. If he is fixing foundations, why is it that the PMI index shows that business confidence has crashed since the budget?
Mr. Speaker, we're fixing the foundation. We've got record investment in this country. But she talks about tax rises. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, she stood there and said that she wanted all the investment, all the benefits of the budget, but she didn't know how she was going to pay for it. I noticed that having come here criticising the national insurance rises over and over again, on Monday, she admitted that she wouldn't reverse the position that we set out. Meanwhile, her science minister was saying he was going energetically to do the opposite. They really haven't got a clue what they're doing.
Mr. Speaker, if he wants to know what Conservatives would do, he should resign and find out. Until then...
I'll decide when there's more.
Mr. Speaker, until then, I'm the one asking the questions. There's a petition out there, 2 million people asking him to go. He's the one who doesn't know. He's the one who doesn't know how things work. It is not government that creates growth, Mr. Speaker. It is business. His employment secretary, I don't see her here, she wants more young people in work. But businesses say they are cutting jobs because of the Chancellor's budget. His Deputy Prime Minister, she is not here. Her employment rights bill will stop businesses hiring. That's what they say. The CBI said on Monday that the dots of the government's policy don't join up. They're right, aren't they?
Mr. Speaker, on Monday she said that she wouldn't reverse the increase in national insurance. Yesterday, on their legacy legislation, their predecessor, they couldn't decide what their position was. Today, they've launched a policy commission asking other people to give them some ideas for government. And she talks about a petition. We had a massive petition on the 4th of July in this country. Years taking our party from a party of protest to a party of government. They're hurtling in the opposite direction.
What a load of nonsense, Mr. Speaker. We had a budget in March this year and tractors were not blockading the streets of Whitehall afterwards. So let me give him another example of a real business. Following his budget, the head of McVitie's has said that it has been harder to understand what the case for investment in the UK is. So while the Prime Minister has been hobnobbing in Brazil, businesses have been struggling to digest his budget. Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that the Employment Rights Bill shows that it is not only the ginger nut that is causing him problems?
I was attending the G20. I suspect on their current trajectory, they don't know whether they're going to attend the G20 or not. Maybe the Policy Commission will come up with an answer on that one. But we've had record investment from overseas into this country. And she keeps carping from the sidelines. She says at this dispatch book, she wants all the benefits of the budget, all the investment, but she doesn't want to pay for any of it. Mr. Speaker, she's racked up £6.7 billion of unfunded commitments in just 3 weeks as leader of the opposition. So once it comes to the economy, we're the ones growing the economy.
Mr. Speaker, the investment he's taking credit for was our work. I was business secretary. We negotiated those deals that he announced. But the bottom line is that in all that he has said, he doesn't seem to care about the young people who will lose their jobs as a result of his budget. Perhaps he can show more concern for the 1,100 people who found out yesterday that they could lose their jobs at Vauxhall's plant in Luton. So while he flies around making unilateral commitments, back home, the real-world effects are businesses closing in Bedfordshire and Basildon. Does the Prime Minister stand by his promise to ban the sale of petrol cars by 2030, even if more jobs will be lost?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't normally invite a heckle, but that one was accurate. Mr. Speaker, the question of the position of jobs in Luton is a very serious one, and families and workers will be very worried, and we are obviously engaging with them. I would remind the Leader of the Opposition that the EV mandates that are an issue in this particular case were actually introduced by the last government. I would also remind her that she was the business secretary that introduced them. We're getting on with supporting those communities. She's shouting from the sideline.
Mr. Speaker, he clearly didn't read his briefing about the EV mandate. The fact is, we changed the date and made it easier for people. Everything he has done is attack people. The budget was an attack on farmers, an attack on workers, an attack on pensioners, an attack on the young, and an attack on thousands of charities and businesses across the country. The whole system is broken, Mr. Speaker, and he is making things worse. He is making things worse.
Constituents will be affected.
Mr. Speaker, he is making things worse. Everyone is unhappy. Isn't it a good thing that the Chancellor is an expert at customer complaints?
Mr. Speaker, I think she's just read out the charge sheet against the last government. Everything is broken. And they come here every week with absolutely nothing to offer except complaints. Nothing constructive, no new ideas. They don't know what they're doing from one day to the next. Living in this fantasy world that everything was fine apparently for 14 years. Well, the country's fed up with those fantasies. They've got rid of those fantasies. We're going to take the hard decisions. They're jumping on every bandwagon that's passing. We're taking the country forward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we enter the last week of Islamophobia Awareness Month, the Prime Minister will know that this year has been an extraordinarily difficult for British Muslims on the receiving end of society's most deplorable attitudes, considered easy prey for the far right and scapegoated by politicians endorsing institutional Islamophobia. And the reality is this emboldening and normalisation of Islamophobia, as highlighted in a number of reports, led to the race riots we saw on the streets of Britain this summer, where mosques and those who are visibly Muslim were subject to despicable attacks, with many left fearing for their lives. So will the Prime Minister condemn those in public office and positions of power who actively promote Islamophobia? Will he commit to adopting a definition today? And will he further outline what concrete steps the government is taking to rip out Islamophobia at its roots, including in this place?
Mr. Speaker, he's right to raise Islamophobia, and there's been a concerning rise in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism over recent months, and we are committed to tackling all forms of hatred, and we will work with others on an ongoing basis to make sure that we do. Thank you.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Red Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about the terrible impact of Storm Bert with all the flooding? Our thoughts are with all those affected, with thanks to our amazing emergency services. Mr. Speaker, Christine's father was told that he needed end-of-life care, but after a few days it was removed due to funding cuts. He was told that he wouldn't get it, and he died a few weeks later in excruciating pain. Christian said it was terrible to watch him suffer. Does the Prime Minister agree that whatever the House decides on Friday, it is urgent to improve access to high-quality end-of-life care? And will he make that a key focus of the 10-year NHS plan? And will he commit now to protect hospices from the national insurance rise?
I thank you for raising that case, and I think the thoughts of the whole House with the family involved. And, Mr. Speaker, obviously there's a very important vote on Friday, but whichever way that vote goes, we must invest properly in care across our health service, and that's why, in addition to putting the NHS back on its feet, we're putting forward a 10-year plan to make sure the NHS can give the care that everybody would expect across the spectrum, including end-of-life care.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for that reply, and I hope we'll hear more from ministers, particularly on hospices and national insurance, in days to come. Turning to the cost of living crisis, On Friday, Ofgem said that in January, energy bills would go up again after last month's 10% rise. Millions of people are really worried about how they're going to make ends meet this winter, not least hundreds of thousands of pensioners who are in poverty but above the pension credit limit, who will now lose winter fuel payments. So with energy bills going up again, will the Prime Minister reconsider and restore winter fuel payments?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously the whole House is concerned about energy bills, which are actually lower this year than they were last year. The long-term way to deal with this is clean power by 2030 to make sure we drive those energy bills down on a permanent basis. And that's what we will do. On the winter fuel allowance, he knows very well what the government's position is, and I've rehearsed it, indeed, with him many times.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Antisocial behaviour involving modified and off-road bikes is a menace that has a huge impact on communities like mine in Sunderland. While I welcome the work Northumbria Police do in partnership with our council on this issue, they need stronger powers and more resources. Can the Prime Minister outline how he will back the police to tackle the misery caused by intimidating and downright dangerous antisocial behaviour on bikes?
Well, I thank him for raising this, because antisocial behaviour affects so many people. Sometimes it's described to me as low level. It isn't in the impact it has, particularly when it comes to off-road bikes. And that's why we're implementing tough new respect orders, which will give powers to the police, including powers to seize off-road bikes, but crucially adds a power of arrest for breach of the orders, something that's been missing in recent years. So we will tackle this because it blights communities across the country.
Stephen Flynn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As everyone in the House will be aware, we're currently in the middle of BBC Anti-Scam Awareness Week. And of course, the advice in that context is always simple. If you see a scam, you should report it. So with that in mind, can the Prime Minister advise the House? Is he aware of anyone who's promised to reduce energy bills only for them to increase? Is he aware of anyone who promised to back business only to tax business? And is he aware of anyone who promised to protect pensioners only to pick their pockets for their winter fuel allowance?
Well, it's very good to see.
Sorry. The gallery will not clap and not interrupt the proceedings. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very glad to see him in his seat in this House, as I'm sure many of his colleagues in Scotland share that sentiment. What I can point to is a government in Scotland that promised to take Scotland forward and took them backwards. So I can identify the first one. It's right there.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. November marks Islamophobia Awareness Month. Last year, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a resolution condemning the desecration of religious texts, including the Quran, despite opposition from the previous government. Acts of such mindless desecration only serve to fuel division and hatred within our society. Will the Prime Minister commit to introducing measures to prohibit the desecration of all religious texts and the prophets of the Abrahamic religions?
Well, can I agree with him that desecration is awful and I think should be condemned across the House? We are, as I said before, Mr. Speaker, committed to tackling all forms of hatred and division, including, of course, Islamophobia in all of its forms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sarah and her family have farmed beef and cattle in my Gordon and Buchan constituency for over 70 years, and they'd always planned for her sister to continue the family legacy. Earlier this year, Sarah's mother died very suddenly and unexpectedly, and she was just 58. Sarah said to me that despite already having a tragic year, it was made even worse after the budget, saying that changes to agricultural property relief has hit us hard when we're already struggling with bereavement and trying to cope with losing mum. What would the Prime Minister say to Sarah and her family on what has been the most difficult year of their lives, in light as well of the family farm tax?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to her for raising the case and the awful bereavement. And if she would kindly send me the details of the case, then I'll certainly have a look at it. In relation to farming more broadly, as she knows, £5 billion was set aside in the budget over the next 2 years as an investment in farming. That's the biggest amount that's ever been set aside. I hear the chuntering, but they actually failed to spend the last farming budget by £300 million. On the question of inheritance and family farms, obviously it's important to bear in mind in a typical case, which is parents passing to a child, the threshold is £3 million, and that is why, as she knows, the vast majority of farms will be totally unaffected.
Neil Coyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Southwark faces a significant challenge of antisocial behaviour, but fewer police today than in 2010 due to Tory cuts in coalition with the Lib Dems. As the Prime Minister fixes the postcode lottery and law and order, will he consider the request from Southwark Police, Southwark Council and myself for our community to be a pilot test area for the new respect orders to address this serious problem?
Well, I'm grateful for him for raising this because public has been badly eroded under the last government, and we will drive that up with a major programme of reform. That includes recruiting 13,000 more police into neighbourhood policing and the tough new respect orders coupled with the power to arrest for breach of the order.
Rupert Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I sincerely hope that all of us in this House agree that good government is transparent government. In response to my written question on publishing the number of foreign nationals receiving universal credit, I was informed by a Department of Work and Pensions Minister that the feasibility of developing suitable official statistics was being examined. Will the Prime Minister today commit to using his good offices to publish this data transparently?
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising this, and I know there's been an exchange on it, and as soon as I've got an update for him, I will provide that for him so that he's got it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Within weeks of a Labour government, the government delivered for the mine workers in the mine workers pension scheme. It was so well received and it was justice done. However, is it not time to seek the truth with regards to the policing during the miners' strike? And would the Prime Minister commit to an early and full inquiry into the policing during the miners' strike, something which this lot denied for generations?
Well, I'm grateful for him for raising this. That question of the mine workers' pension scheme reversed a historic injustice, and I was so pleased we're able to do that in the budget. In relation to the miners' strike, as I think he knows, I've met some of the Orgreave campaigners and listened very carefully to what they say. They are entitled to the truth, and we're thinking carefully about what the next step should be in order to deliver that for them.
Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next month marks 2 years since the death of Cody Fisher, a young man from my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon. Cody was a talented footballer with a bright future whose life was tragically cut short when he was stabbed in a nightclub in Birmingham. His mother, Tracy, has been campaigning tirelessly in his memory for legislation which would require venues to have bleed kits and metal detectors. In the light of the government's commitment to tackling knife crime, will the Prime Minister meet with Tracy and me to discuss these vital proposals to better protect young people like Cody from the devastating impact of knife crime?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for raising the tragic case and pay tribute to Tracy for her campaigning. I've met a number of families on this issue of bleed kits, so I know firsthand just how important it is. We are taking measures in relation to knife crime, which includes banning the sale of online knives, making them less available, a course to take young people out of offending where we can, and real penalties. But I am happy to look at bleed kits, and I will make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to hear more of what we're doing, but also to make her case.
Rachel Hopkins.
Mr. Speaker, and I refer to my register of interests. The proposed closure of Luton's Vauxhall van plant by Stellantis is devastating news for our town. Over 1,000 jobs at risk and the future prosperity of our town threatened.
So can the Prime Minister assure me there will be cross-departmental response to support the automotive sector, but importantly, good skilled jobs in Luton?
Yes, I will, and I know, and thank her for raising this, because it is a difficult and uncertain time for workers in Luton and her constituents and their families, and that's why we're working with the industry. There will in fact be a statement later on today, Mr. Speaker, about this. It's important we do whatever we can to support these communities.
Then Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tenbury Wells was flooded again with Storm Bert last weekend, the second time the town has been flooded this year, and it's a town where it's only a case of when, not if, it will flood again. And the situation is made even more devastating for residents because there is a fully developed flood defence plan that is partly funded for the town. And the budget carried forward £2.4 billion for flood defences. Can the Prime Minister commit to be able to use his offices to finally get this scheme built and to fix the foundations of Tenbury Wells?
Well, I'm grateful to her for raising this, which is an awful situation for her constituents. We all know how devastating flooding is, the initial damage that it caused, but then the ongoing damage, including problems then of insurance, etc., that then prevail for many, many years. We are committed to tackling this. That's why we set aside the money that we did in the budget, and I'll happily arrange for her to have a meeting with the relevant minister to look at the particular details of her case. But I thank her for raising it, because I do know for her constituents it's such an important issue.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last weekend in Cwmteleiri, torrential rain caused a landslip. Slurry, even boulders, poured down streets. People were afraid. The Chancellor just agreed a welcome £25 million for coal tip movements in Wales. Given the impact of extreme weather events, will the Prime Minister continue to prioritise coal tips to keep our communities safe?
Yes, I will, and I know how much of a concern it is to his constituents. Indeed, we went together to meet some of those constituents last time there was terrible flooding, but that commitment to the £25 million in relation to coal tips is very important. And what I would say on flooding, we've now had two questions on this. If other members of the House do have individual issues they're not able to raise here, if they get in touch with myself or my office, I'll make sure that they get whatever they need in support of their constituents.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and of course we too welcome the ceasefire in Lebanon. But now that arrest warrants have been issued for his allies, Netanyahu and Gallant, the Prime Minister's determination to supply Israel with the weapons it requires to carry out its atrocities in Gaza, which has always been morally repugnant, is now completely untenable. But what these warrants would do is present him with a perfectly valid legal avenue by which he can end the UK's complicity in this slaughter. So will he do that, or will the Prime Minister continue to choose to licence F-35 components to a regime which is now led by a man wanted for war crimes and crimes against humanity?
We've set out our position under the current law, as he well knows. I've set out my position very, very clearly in relation to the sale of capability to Israel to defend itself against attacks such as those from Iran. And I'm very clear that we'll continue to do so.
Catherine Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Derby City Centre is turning the page on 14 years of Conservative decline. With a new performance venue, a new business school and restored market hall. But across the country we see too many empty shops and quiet high streets. This budget is putting more money into the pockets of working people to spend supporting local businesses. Will the Prime Minister commit, contrary to Conservative scaremongering, to support and protect small businesses that are the beating heart of our high streets?
They can chunter all they like. She's describing their legacy. is describing their legacy. We are turning that around. We're supporting small businesses. We're supporting the high street. We're rebuilding our country as they go backwards.
David Reid. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Exmouth and Exeter East and our neighbours across the southwest.
It's our festive treat to you. Your chance to win an incredible £50,000 in tax-free cash. Our biggest ever Great British giveaway. What would you spend £50,000 on in the coming year? Spectacular holidays, a brand new car, home improvements, or maybe you'd just like to save it for a special occasion. For your chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Was the PM, Sir Keir Starmer, taking questions from MPs in the House of Commons. We're still joined here in the studio in Westminster by Labour MP for Tiffin Barnet, Dan Tomlinson, and Shadow Farming Minister Robbie Moore.
And we have got some fantastic questions, pages and pages of them this week. Thank you so much for sending them in. They're genuinely brilliant. Remember, gbnews.com/yoursay. This programme, it's all about you. Our politicians answer your questions, not ours.
Our first question here from Luke. Now, Luke tells us he's a very close friend. He has a friend who's a tool maker at the Vauxhall site in Luton. She's been told that she and her husband will lose their jobs. Listening to the PM on PMQs, he was disgusted by the light-hearted lack of awareness of how people's lives were being ruined in this country. Come and speak to the real people. He says here, we're losing our livelihoods. How can you justify that? Well, that question surely is to the Labour representative on a panel, Dan Tomlinson. I mean, Dan, what can the government do about the shutting of this factory, this van factory in Luton?
Well, this is a really important question. And, you know, personally, this is an issue and a topic that's close to my heart, the manufacturing sector in this country. I come from a working-class background. My dad worked at the Rover plant in Cowley in East Oxford when there was that uncertainty. Then it got transferred to being a BMW plant.
And that Longbridge closed then, and Cowley was kept open in 2003.
You know, and he was from the northeast that had its manufacturing sector gutted in the 1980s. So anyway, just to say, it's something that me and Labour politicians, and I think actually politicians across the House understand we need to make sure we look after our manufacturing sector in this country, and particularly when we get news like this, work together, work in partnership with business and with unions and with the local community to make sure that we can protect people.
Those jobs can't go, can they? Surely. This is a Labour government. The Business Secretary will be making a statement today. You can't let those jobs go.
Yeah, we will hear from Johnny Reynolds in the next few minutes. I think he is going to be talking about our long-term plan to make sure that we can get the balance right, of course, between moving towards net zero to protect the environment, but making sure we do so alongside protecting jobs and working people's incomes. That's really important. It's really important to me too that this transition that we are in, we make sure we do it in a way that protects people's work, protects people's livelihoods and protects their incomes.
But Dan Thompson, that is what is not happening. This factory's being closed because of this EV target, we're told here, by the company that owns the factory. They are blaming, in part, your government's targets, and is it not right that maybe they should be relaxed?
Well, let's be clear about the fact that it was the Conservative government that brought in these targets in the first place.
And I will put that to our Conservative guest in a moment.
And actually, this is a Labour government that wants to do the best it can by our communities across the country. That's why we're seeing the Business Secretary come forward with a statement today. He says that we get this. They were his words just the other day. And I think we'll wait to see what he has to announce today. And he will be working very closely, and he is working very closely with the companies that produce these cars so that we can make sure we get the outcomes that we all want.
The Conservatives, Robbie Moore, They said they're going to close the van-making plant in Luton amid what it called the stringent UK zero-emission vehicle mandate. That's your mandate.
Well, look, what's happening in Luton is terrible. I think there's proposed to be up to 1,100 jobs. And there'll be more than that because there'll be those that are involved in the supply chain. And those jobs absolutely need to be saved. And what I hope the government do is properly not just give out warm words, but listen to the challenges that are being proposed by the car-making industry, which is why, under the Rishi administration, we relaxed and we were more pragmatic and more realistic in wanting to reach net zero by pushing the date back from 2030 to 2035 to allow more time for the market to adjust for those that wanted to buy petrol or diesel cars. And what we're seeing from the Labour government is that coming back to a 2030 deadline, which is obviously having huge negative impacts on the car-making industry. And that's what I suspect has been one of the significant issues that has led to the announcement by those Vauxhall. So, yes, it's good to hear warm words, but I hope that there is going to be proper traction and a proper understanding of the negative consequences that are proposed by the car-making industry.
Just to say that one of our objectives in this government is to get away from the chopping and the changing that we saw, both in terms of the churn through a number of chancellors, that I can't even count how many there were, a number of prime ministers and a number of policies as well. I think Rishi Sunak's decision on this, even though he supported it when he was chancellor, came around the same time that even though he backed HS2, he then scrapped HS2, the northern leg of it. We want to make sure that the commitments that we set out in partnership with business are not changing all the time. That's why we are being clear that we want to stick with this.
Dan, is there a risk here the government goes ahead of where the infrastructure is? Aren't enough EV charging points? Yes, we need to decarbonise. Everyone gets that. But doing that at the expense of a van factory in Luton, 1,100 jobs going, plus ×3 for the supply chain. That's a huge hit for a town like Luton, which needs more employment now.
One of the things we've done since we been in office in the last 4 or so months is we have increased the funding for the electric vehicle transition. I think now there's the funding to install 57 charge points every single day in this country to make it easier for people to make that switch.
Have announced a consultation, so that suggests they don't think everything is going well.
So a consultation, but also what's clear is that the wider business community are not accepting of the budget measures that were put in place.
From the Business Secretary live right now on those proposed job losses at the Luton van-making plant.
Their manufacturing sites in the United Kingdom. Can I begin by saying I know yesterday was a dark day for Luton. This is an iconic plant, powered by a talented workforce, and there are very few people in the town who don't know someone who works at the site. I want to outline the steps the government has taken to try and prevent this outcome and how we're going to support the industry and the area going forward. Mr. Speaker, the Transport Secretary and I found out about the challenges at this site just 10 days after the election. The global CEO told us he felt extremely frustrated by the lack of action from the previous government, which meant his desire was to close the Luton plant. Since then, we have been involved in intense negotiations with the company to try and find a way to keep the site open. Following these initial meetings, in July of this year, the company announced its intention to conduct a review of its operations in response to the significant pressures they were facing in key markets. Following the review, the company set out plans on Tuesday which will see manufacturing at the 2 current Stellantis plants consolidated into a single location. We were, and are, aware that Stellantis has significant excess capacity across Europe. The company's talk of efficiency and investment elsewhere will, of course, be positive for their bottom line, but it will come as no comfort to the workers affected. For over a century, Vauxhall as a brand has been synonymous with Luton, and we are bitterly disappointed to hear that this relationship looks likely to end. Our number one priority is the people of Luton, who will, of course, be devastated by this decision. News like this rips through the heart of communities, sending shockwaves beyond those immediately impacted, through their families, their communities, and the businesses they support. I myself grew up in a car community, and I know what it is like when half the street work at the same site. We have asked the company to urgently share their full plans with us and to work with the government so that every single worker who is impacted receives the support they deserve. The Department for Work and Pensions stands ready to help anyone affected with the rapid response service designed exactly for these kinds of scenarios. It provides vital support and advice to both employers and their employees facing redundancy. I want the House to be aware that we have done everything we possibly can to prevent this closure from happening. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Transport, and I met Stellantis many times over the summer and again on Tuesday morning to discuss the situation and the acute pressures the company is facing. We've worked hard to find a solution that would support the business and ensure people kept their jobs, and we confirmed in writing we were willing to consider any solution put forward. However, despite our best efforts, we have been forced to accept that this is ultimately a commercial decision by Stellantis as they respond to wider challenges within the sector. And I'll be frank with honourable members. These challenges are not confined to any one company. Car manufacturers around the world are battling with increased costs, supply chain issues, and changing consumer demand in a highly competitive, fast-evolving market. Honourable members will know that last week, Ford also announced 800 job losses in the UK over the next 3 years as part of a major restructuring programme across the whole of Europe. Many of the challenges faced by our car manufacturers are global in nature, and they cannot be resolved by UK government intervention alone. And whilst this announcement is not what we wanted, nor what we worked towards, we must not mischaracterise this. It categorically does not signal a retreat by Stellantis from the UK. The plans announced by the company will also see them investing £50 million as they consolidate manufacturing at their Ellesmere Port plant in Cheshire.
Jonathan Reynolds there, he's the business secretary, saying there this is a commercial decision. They're urging the company to share its plans with the government, but crucially, I think there, no extra money for helping out this factory. I think back, I'm old enough to remember MG Rover and the big battle of that being closed back in 2001, I think it was. Stephen Byers, then the Trade and Industry Secretary, he got involved. There'll be huge pressure, Gloria, went there locally to do more, be more interventionist, but the government now is saying they won't be to save this plant.
Well, this will be a longer statement. He did say it was a commercial decision, so that suggested that the government were not going to intervene. But remember, he has some time to speak yet, and if he does say anything, which will be of some comfort to those people working at that Luton plant, we will bring it to you immediately.
Dan Thompson, just briefly on that, is that right? Do you think the government should stay out of this?
Well, it was encouraging to hear something that was obviously going to have been the case, which is that the business secretary of the government have been working as hard as they can to do everything they possibly can to try and prevent this announcement from happening. And I'm sure that this is not the end of the conversations. This is not the end of the government trying to work with Vauxhall, trying to work with the trade unions to find a way forward.
OK, we're going to go back to our questions, unless you particularly want to say something on that.
That the government can do right now is go back and look at the dates. So they have made a choice, this new Labour government, to bring forward the date to 2030 for petrol and diesel cars being sold. We relaxed that, we pushed it back to 2030. Now, if the government were serious about looking at the challenges that were being quite rightly proposed by the car manufacturing industry, they would look at those dates that we relaxed when we were in power. And that, unless there is going to be more announcements made in this statement, it doesn't seem as if this Labour government are actually listening to the concerns that have been raised by the car manufacturing industry.
We will see. We will see. I want to bring in another one of our viewers' questions. I'm going to start with Robbie Moore, our Conservative Shadow Minister, our Conservative MP today. And Heather, thank you for sending in this question. It's very personal and we all appreciate you sharing it with us. My late brother had horrendous waiting times. When I rushed him to hospital and they found out he had cancer, he was in hospital nearly a month. Wait on a CT scan, so we knew where it was. We were told it's the way it is. It probably wasn't aggressive. Guess what? It was 3 months later. He passed away, couldn't get anyone to help at the end as they're all stretched. He wasn't well for a while and was given a basic blood test and given vitamin D tablets. Our heart goes out to you and your family, Heather. That's a picture that tells a much bigger picture of a problem, which is our NHS. And many people suggest that your government left it in absolute tatters, and we are all suffering with that today.
Well, look, it's deeply traumatic to hear of those stories that Heather's raised, and there are many, many families, including my own, that have had relatives that have had cancer and experienced challenges through the care that they've had, and it's deep. You know, no one likes to hear about that. But when we were in government, we massively increased the amount of funding that was going into the NHS. Over the time of the Parliament, the budget was increased by 45%.
But the outcomes didn't improve. It's your fault.
You know, it's up to 165 billion pounds a year going into the NHS, but it can't just be about the funding. Absolutely right. It's got to be about looking at the efficiencies, the management structures, and the deliverables and the outcomes that are experienced from that. Which is why we were focused on getting the long-term workforce plan put in place for the NHS, so that we could make sure that those structures were specifically scrutinised and the best level of care could be put out by the government.
Yeah. OK. Dan, may I just put this point to you, and Chris Hope sort of alluded to this earlier. You see, shouldn't Wes Streeting not be worrying or campaigning against the vote on Friday? He should be putting all his efforts and energy into making sure our NHS is sorted out. He's the only one that's had quite a big dollop of money to do so. But this debate on Friday is sucking all the energy about what Wes Streeting should be focusing on, and he's talking about this instead.
Well, I think Wes was asked in a private PLP meeting what he thought, and he answered the question, which he's always good at doing. But let's be clear about what we've done since we took office. We made difficult decisions in this budget to raise tax revenue, to fund the NHS, to put that money in alongside the reform. Wes has announced that, and we've got that consultation. I believe people can still go on the NHS website and put in their views, health professionals and the public too. We all know about the inefficiencies that we can see in the NHS, that working with doctors and healthcare professionals we can change. We've also put, to go directly to the story and the experience of Heather and her brother, we've also put £3 billion into scanners. And one of the big problems we've had in recent years is that, yes, more money has gone in, but it's gone on the day-to-day spending, and then each year the NHS has raided its investment budget to buy things like scanners and more beds or more buildings to fund the day-to-day spending because there wasn't enough.
So how can you get better outcomes?
Sure that
why did Tories fail? They put money into it. Why can Labour do better on the outcomes for people like Heather and her family?
Well, we will make sure that we get that balance better between the investment in the future and the day-to-day spending. And then also Wes has talked really, I think, powerfully about moving from analogue to digital, but also moving from the hospital to the community. In my patch, they're going to redo the way the A&E works so that fewer people get sucked into the hospital and have to get treated in the wrong place and come out back into the community again.
But there is a wider point on this as well to do with GP services and primary care. The additional cost that is burdened that is being put on many GP practices that have contacted me to the changes with employers' national insurance. An additional cost through the budget that the Chancellor has specifically made.
Can I just check what the Tory policy is on these NIs then, on this increase in national insurance? She said, I think on Monday she'd reverse it. The other day she said she wouldn't.
More on the GP contract.
We don't actually know what the Conservative policy is in relation to funding the NHS.
The GP contract is being settled by the end of the year, we know that, and we're expecting more money for GPs to deal with the cost of that and the national insurance increase on employers. Neil from Yorkshire has asked us for you here, Dan, why is the PM, your leader, jet-setting around the world when there's so many pressing issues at home, like the winter fuel allowance to farmers, to the stalling economy? He's never here. Keir, why isn't he here?
Well, Keir's here a lot. I think he's been away for how many days?
20, 22,
and we're almost 5 months into this government, so almost half
Have you seen much of it, though? Are you annoyed about this?
Can I just say, though, on the specific point about him going to important overseas visits, meeting with world leaders, I would expect that from any new incoming Prime Minister to go and meet their counterparts abroad. And also what he's doing is taking the domestic concerns of people who voted for change, be that on migration or on the economy, and raising them with his with colleagues from across the world to make sure that we can learn from what other countries are doing on these issues and get that investment we need in our economy too. So I think it's a good thing that he's going out to bat for the want these international summits and building those relationships with people that he'll have to maintain over the coming years.
A couple of minutes left on programme. I want to make sure it's balanced.
Taking domestic concerns, but what he is absolutely not doing is dealing with the domestic concerns. We've seen that through the catastrophic measures within their budget that is impacting many, many working businesses, our farming community, our GP surgeries, our dentist surgeries are all raising these concerns, but yet the government and the Prime Minister Minister don't seem to be listening. I think what the issue is here is we've got a government and a cabinet that have not had the practical experiences, and indeed many new MPs that have gone off and done PPE or worked for trade unions, worked in the lobbying sector, not actually had proper business backgrounds before coming into politics. And we're seeing that through the decisions that have been made by this cabinet.
OK, I just want to ask our Conservative representative, Robbie Moore, the Shadow Farming Minister, a question from Bob. All I can say, he says after watching that, is bring back Liz Truss.
Well, doesn't that just illustrate actually how the budget is being received by the wider public? We've had a petition that is being launched that's had well over 2 million signatures wanting to call for a general election. Labour are sitting on a popular majority of about 33%. You know, they are not necessarily being well received by the public in terms of the decisions that they're making, and that is being borne not only by the protests that we've seen in Westminster last week, where there was thousands of farmers that came to Westminster to make their point. And I hope the government...
Dan Tomlinson, is Liz Truss the answer?
Well, it is very easy for the Conservatives to criticise from opposition, but instead what they've done is rack up, I think, now £7 billion of sort of unfunded commitments, money that they would therefore have to take out of the NHS or our schools budgets, undermining public services.
Will you two come back again? Because I feel like this has got like some way to run with you two.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Coming up, it's Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Miriam, who are going to tell us what they've got in their show.
Well, good afternoon. We're going to be looking at the potential loss of 1,000 jobs at the Vauxhall plant in Luton and the impact of the electric vehicle demands by the net zero policy. Is it time to scrap the net zero commitment?
And some extraordinary scenes at Prime Minister's questions, where not one but two backbench Labour members of Parliament demanded blasphemy laws be introduced in the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, sidestepped those specific demands, but the question remains, why were the questions asked at all?
Well, a thrilling show there from Tom and Miriam. Thank you both today. It's been great to have you here.
I was going to say, me and Miriam are sort of party political cross-dressing. She's all in red, I'm in blue.
We take all sides here at GB News. Enjoy Tom and Miriam. That's all from us here in Westminster. Thank you for joining us.
See you next.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. It was a very wet start